Eternal Darkness, Sanity's Requiem, the novel, Chapter 7, Enchanting, the Dark Insanity. Alexandra watched as Richard reappeared in the room. She could tell by the look on his face that he was thankful to be back. She had seen Yvette arrive back earlier, but she could tell Richard had had the harder time. When Richard was fully back, she looked at him and said, "What happened? What did you see?" She watched as Richard moved to lean against the one wall and said, "What I saw was insane. Pius had corrupted the monks at Amiens. They only worship Chaturga now. Zombies were everywhere. There were other things there as well, a strange scorpion-like creature that sent Anthony to another realm. I think it was a walking trap, or a trapper would be a better term. Then there was this huge three-headed thing. It was a horror to look at." She heard Yvette say, "Maybe you should call it that. Haven't what what happened to Anthony? Is he dead?" She wondered if that was the case as well. She watched as Richard shook his head and said, "I don't know. The spell they cast on him seemed to make his body decay. I think it was designed to do that, but not kill him. It's possible he's still alive today. I don't think the other creatures could have taken him. When it came out of the monk, I didn't see any bones from the monk. It was as if the creature stole his bones." Alexandra shuddered at the thought of that. It was then she remembered that this was the first time any of the characters had used magic. She looked at Richard and said, "Didn't Anthony use a spell in that chapter?" She watched as Richard lowered his head and said, "Yes, it was an enchant item spell. It made his sword more powerful. It could—" She heard Yvette say the next words, like the two were thinking the same thing. "Also fix items. It can fix the key you broke." She now realized that they were all thinking the very same thing. They now had a way to get to the upstairs rooms. She opened the tome and quickly turned the pages, past all the stories she had read, and was amazed when she found the pages of magic. She came across a page for each rune, and finally reached the scroll containing the spell. She pulled out the key and recited the spell. As she said each rune, she heard an unholy voice repeat them, and 3 green runes appeared on the ground around her. Soon green lightning emanated from the runes and struck the broken key, fusing it into a whole key again. She held up the key and said, "Anyone want to head to the second floor?" She heard Yvette say, "With the things happening the way they are, I don't think any of us should be going anywhere alone. Right now, we need to all stick together. This room is the only safe haven in this house. It's probably why all the research material were in here." She then saw that Richard nodded in agreement. She led them to the door and opened it. The second she stepped in the hallway, she froze. She saw blood running down the walls. She started to hyperventilate as she said, "Tell me this isn't happening. Tell me that blood isn't coming down the walls." She was hoping it was just an illusion. However, she did hope she wasn't losing her mind. She had known her family had a history of mental illness, and she hoped she wasn't mentally ill. Yvette stepped forward past Alexandra and said, "The walls are fine, Alexandra. Right now, the most important thing is to explore the second floor. Are you all right, dear?" She turned to see Richard nod his head, but she could tell by looking at his eyes that he saw the blood too. Something about her curse somehow kept her from seeing the blood. If the illusion was being seen by both her husband and Alexandra, then something was making them see it. As she led them through the library, she heard her husband say, "Something about what we are experiencing must be affecting our sanity. Maybe we'll find a way to restore it. We found a way to restore the broken items. We may find a way to restore health and sanity as well." As they entered the foyer, she heard a knocking at the door, and a loud voice saying, "Miss Roivas, it's Inspector Legrasse. I need to speak with you." Yvette turned to the others and said, "Do you want me to handle this? Should I tell him you're resting?" She saw Alexandra nod and say, "That would be best. The bedrooms are all upstairs. It wouldn't exactly be a lie. He may ask who you are." She then heard her husband say, "I've spoken with him. If you say my name, he'll realize who you are. He might even tell you to be careful. Those creatures are starting to show up out there." She then watched as Alexandra and Richard headed up the steps and entered the upstairs hall. When the door closed, she quietly said, "For as long as I've known love, they were always there." She knew that the tome's insidious magic made her husband able to see the creatures. All her life she had seen those creatures. Not even her father had seen the creatures when she saw them. But she knew enough not to let those things know she saw them. All her life she learned to hide her knowledge of the creatures. As a child, rambling of creatures sounded like kids' fears. Now, she outwardly admitted they didn't exist, but inwardly she knew the truth. She then turned and headed to the door. She opened the door and was inwardly shocked at what she saw. It was a skeletal-like creature. She stayed calm as she said, "May I help you?" She listened as the thing said, "I'm Inspector Legrasse. Is Alexandra Roivas around?" She could see no sense of concern on its face. However, she did see a look of curiosity on it. Yvette didn't feel comfortable with this thing looking at her and said, "I'm sorry. She's resting now. It's been a very taxing day. My husband and I were offering condolences and help." She saw a look of understanding cross the thing's face. It then nodded and said, "I take it you are Mr. Kale's wife. I have to admit that you look familiar. However, I'm trying to place where." She just shrugged and said, "Inspector Legrasse, if you need Miss Rivers to call you, I can have her call you. She just needed to lie down after our talk. There is still much to talk about, and my husband and I don't plan on leaving until things have settled. She needs all the support she can get right now." Yvette watched as the figure stepped back for a moment and said, "All right, I'll stop by at a later time. Tell her that I'm making sure that she's safe in case the murderer comes back." She knew better than to believe that. She closed the door and listened for when the figure stepped away. She then ran up the stairs, knowing she had to warn Richard and Alexandra about who Inspector Legrasse really was. When she got into the upstairs hall, she heard a scream come from the room to the right. She was sure something had happened to Alexandra. Richard had just gotten Alexandra out of the bathroom when his wife ran in. He saw her look at Alexandra and ask, "What happened?" He looked at his wife and said, "We had just gotten done searching in here, finding some gun ammo and an odd locked shelf with no keyhole, when we started to search the bathroom. When we entered, I had found some notes from her ancestor, and she screamed in fright. I turned to see what looked like her in a tub full of blood, obviously dead. I think something is trying to drive us mad." He was surprised when Yvette said, "I think I know who it is. Inspector Legrasse is not what he seems." He looked over at his wife, knowing that she hadn't seen the blood on the walls. He also knew she had not seen a window where he saw one. He looked at her and said, "What did you see?" He knew she wouldn't lie about what she saw. It wasn't in her nature to lie to him. She was the daughter of an archaeologist, and always in search for the truth. He could also tell that whatever she would say, it would have a long-lasting impact. He was startled when Yvette said, "Inspector Legrasse is actually pious. I saw what he really was when I answered the door. He couldn't hide that from me. I don't think he realized I recognized him. However, I think he knows more about what happened to Dr. Roivas than he claims." He then heard Alexandra say, "If what you're saying is true, then he might be after me next, especially since we found the tome. Maybe that's why he's around." Richard then heard his wife say, That's also why all those creatures are gathering around. They are getting ready to strike at the house. I think we should find the next page and return to the secret room." He nodded in agreement. He then heard Alexandra say, "There's nothing in here. There's nothing in here, so let's head to the other end of the hall." He and his wife then followed Alexandra out of the room and towards the far end. As they walked, he watched the statue turn to face Alexandra as she passed. He was sure it was another trick of the mind. As they neared the end of the hall, he heard Alexandra say, "Maybe we should each check a path. I'll look in the room here. Yvette, look in the door here. And Richard, head down the hall." He nodded and heard the two doors open. As he stepped down the hall, he heard Yvette say, "This room is pitch black and like there's no power going to it. I'll join you, Alexandra." As he stepped further down the hall, he was shocked to see a ghostly man dressed in colonial clothes. The ghost had to be from the time the States were part of his home country of England. He watched as the ghost walked through the wall, carrying what looked like a gun. Before he could do anything else, the ghost was gone. He ran to where the ghost was, but all he saw was something odd about the wall. He ran to the end of the hall and stopped at the window, seeing a red haze all around it. He could also see a piece of paper in the window, but decided it wasn't the page they were looking for. He ran back to the room, only to see Alexandra and Yvette come out with the next page in hand. He then heard Alexandra say, "It was behind a picture in the guest room. Let's head back to the secret room." As he followed them, he said to Alexandra, "How long has your family been in this home? Was it since colonial times?" When she nodded, he said, "I think I saw the ghost of one of your ancestors. There has to be a reason to why I saw him." He listened as Alexandra said, "Hopefully we'll find out why. Right now we need to find out what this chapter's about." He nodded and soon realized they were back at the room and out of breath. As they caught their breath, he heard Yvette say, "It looks like this chapter takes place in Persia, just like Pius's chapter. I think this one is set in 565 AD, around some man named Karim. We better get ready for another trip." He nodded in agreement, especially when he had caught his breath. He watched as Alexandra put the page in the tome and said, "All right, if you both are ready, let's investigate the gift of forever." He watched as Alexandra started to read, and saw that both he and Yvette were re-entering the eerie past the tome of eternal darkness sent them to.